Imagine this. You've left Australia, moved to Dubai, and think you're finally free. Until the ATO hits you with a six-figure tax bill after you've left. And this isn't a one-off. It's happening more often, and the new 2026 tax rules could trap thousands of Australians inside the system for years, even after they move abroad. And we've worked with a lot of Australians making this move. And let me be blunt. If you're thinking about leaving, this might be your last window to do it properly. The Australian government is rolling out the toughest tax residency laws in history now, and they're not trying to make things clearer. They're trying to lock you in. According to the Australian Treasury's own 2023 consultation paper, the goal is adhesive residency, making it harder to stop being a resident than to start. Today I'll show you exactly how the bright line test, the 45-day trap, and these changes will impact your exit strategy, and why making your move before 2026 might save you hundreds of thousands in taxes. Hit subscribe. This affects every Australian entrepreneur or investor looking to go global, and the window is closing fast. So let me start with the truth about Australian new tax residency rules. The Australian government calls this modernization, but what they're really doing is building a tax prison that's almost impossible to escape from. Right now, under the current system, you can still work your way out of Australian tax residency if you plan this properly. But the Australian tax changes in 2026 will introduce what's called the Australian Bright Line test, and it changes literally everything. So under the new Australian tax residency rules, if you spend 183 days or more in Australia in any tax year, you're automatically a tax resident. No exemptions, no arguments. This is the primary Australia Bright Line test, and it's designed to catch people who never intended to be Australian tax residents before. But here's where it gets really nasty, and that is a secondary test that will trap most people. If you spend between 45 and 182 days in Australia, you'll be subject to the Australia 45-day rule tax residency. And this means even a couple of short business trips or family visits could make you a tax resident potentially. So the new rules include what they call the factor test. And if you spend more than 45 days in Australia and meet two of these four factors, you're trapped as a tax resident, having the right to live permanently in Australia, having Australian accommodation available, having Australian family, or having Australian economic connections. So most Australians will automatically meet at least two of these factors now, which means the Australia 45-day rule tax residency become a 45-day trap. Now let's talk about Australian tax resident exit strategies under these new rules, because this is where most people will get caught. So the new Australian tax residency rules in 2026 create different exit rules depending on whether you're a short-term or long-term resident. And if you've been an Australian tax resident for 3 consecutive years or more, you are considered as a long-term resident. And the Australia 3-year tax exit requirement becomes brutal. As an Australian long-term resident tax exit, you'll need to spend fewer than 45 days in Australia for 3 consecutive years to break free. That's not 45 days per year. That's 45 days total over 3 years. One extended family emergency or business trip could reset your entire exit clock immediately. But there's one exception, the Australian Overseas Employment Tax Rule. If you take up overseas employment for more than 2 years, have accommodation in this overseas country for the entire period, and spend less than 45 days in Australia each year, you can qualify for immediate non-residency. But the problem is that most modern employment arrangements don't meet these strict criteria. Remote work, consulting arrangements, or employment with related entities don't qualify. So this is why smart Australians are implementing their Australian tax resident exit strategies right now, before these rules take effect in July 2026. So let me tell you about Australia making it harder to leave through a real example. Under the current rules, I helped an Australian entrepreneur move to Dubai. He kept his Australian property, maintained some business connections, and visited Australia for about 60 days per year. He successfully became a non-resident for tax purposes. And under the new rules, what would be happening? He'd be trapped. The 60 days exceeds the 45-day threshold, and he has Australian accommodation and he has Australian economic interests. So he'd meet for the factor test and remain a tax resident despite living in Dubai. So this is exactly what the Australian tax trap in 2026 is designed to do. Catch people who previously could legitimately claim non-residency. And the numbers are staggering. Currently, many Australians living overseas legitimately claim non-residency. Under the new rules, expert estimates that 60 to 70% of these people will be classified as tax residents. Now, let's talk about the solution that's working for our clients. Moving from Australia to the UAE before these rules take literally effect. So the UAE offers one of the most tax efficient destinations for Australian expats. And here's why it works so well for Australian tax resident exit strategies. First, the UAE has no personal income tax, which means you can earn a substantial income without any UAE tax obligations. Second, the UAE recently introduced clear tax residency rules that made it easier to establish genuine tax residency there. So you can become a UAE tax resident by spending 183 days in the UAE in the last 12 months period, or 90 days if you're a UAE resident with a permanent place of residence or employment. And this creates a perfect strategy for leaving Australia for UAE tax benefits. So you can establish clear UAE tax residency while minimizing your days in Australia to break free from the Australian prison. But this is important. You need to execute this strategy before the new rules take effect. Once the Australia Bright Line test becomes law, your options become severely limited. Let me walk you through how to become a UAE tax resident while implementing Australian expat tax planning. The process starts with establishing a genuine UAE business setup. So this isn't just about getting a visa, you need to create substantial economic substance in the UAE here. But this means having a real business, real employees, and real business activities as well. Once you have your UAE business established, you can apply for the UAE tax residency. And the UAE requires evidence of your physical presence, also accommodation and economic activities. But the good news is that UAE tax residency certificates are recognized by most countries, including Australia. So the next step is implementing your Australian tax resident exit strategy. And this means carefully documenting your move, minimizing your Australian ties, and ensuring you meet the requirements for Australian non-residency under the current rules. So this is where timing becomes crucial. You want to establish your UAE tax residency and break your Australian tax residency before the new rules take effect in July 2026. And here's what most people get wrong about Australian expat tax planning. They think that this is just about where you live. The reality is much more complex. I can promise you that. The Australian tax residency is determined by the totality of your circumstances. So it's not enough to just move to the UAE. You need to create a pattern of life that clearly demonstrates you've made the UAE your real home. So this means closing Australian bank accounts, selling Australian property that's not generating income, ending Australian business activities, and creating genuine economic substance here in the UAE. So the UAE makes this relatively straightforward because of its business-friendly environment, of course, and also clear tax residency rules. You can establish a legitimate business, create genuine economic activity, and build a real new life here. But you need to act fast because the window for implementing these strategies under the current rules are closing, like I said. So let me share a success story. We helped an Australian consulting firm relocate to Dubai. The business owner established the UAE free zone company, moved his family to Dubai, and created genuine business operations here in the UAE. Under the current Australian rules, he successfully became a UAE tax resident and Australian non-resident. And his effective tax rate dropped from 45% to 9%, a saving of over $200,000 per year. And under the new rules, this same strategy would be much harder to execute, of course. The strict day counting requirements and factor tests would make it extremely difficult to maintain family connections in Australia while also claiming non-residency. So this is why the time to act is now. The Australia tax changes in 2026 really represent the most significant tightening of tax residency rules in Australian history. Now, let me be very clear with you guys about what this means for different types of Australians. If you're a high income earner paying 45% tax in Australia, the savings from moving to the UAE could be really substantial. The UAE's 9% corporate tax and 0% personal income tax create enormous opportunities for tax optimization. I see it every day happening here. And if you're a business owner, the UAE offers not just tax benefits, but also access to growing Middle Eastern markets. Many of our clients have seen their businesses grow significantly after relocating here to Dubai, after, well, 1 month, 3 months, or a year. Also, if you're approaching retirement, the UAE offers a high quality of life with significant tax savings on your retirement income. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about tax savings. This is really about freedom. The new Australian rules create a tax prison that will be impossible to escape once they take effect next year. The Australia Bright Line test, the 45-day rule, and the factor test are designed to trap Australians in the tax system regardless of where they actually live and work. Another question is, what is your action plan if you're serious about leaving Australia for UAE tax benefits? First, you need to move quickly. The new rules take effect in July 2026, like I said, but you need to establish your exit strategy well before then. You need to be prepared. Second, you need professional help. This isn't a do-it-yourself project. The complexity of both Australian exit rules and UAE entry requirements demands expert guidance. Third, you need to create genuine economic substance in the UAE. So this means establishing a real business, real employment, or real investment activities. At ME-Falls, we specialize in helping Australians implement those strategies. We understand both the Australian exit requirements and also the UAE entry process, of course. We can help you navigate the complex rules and create a legitimate work plan that really works. But the window is closing, like I said. Every month that passes makes this more and more difficult and expensive to implement. So here's what I want you to understand now. Australia is not just changing its tax rules, it's fundamentally changing the relationship between the country and its citizens. In my opinion, the new rules represent a philosophy that once you're an Australian, you belong to the Australian tax system forever, like in the US, for example. So this isn't about the wealthy. These rules will affect middle-class Australians, small business owners as well, and anyone who wants the freedom to live and work internationally. The Australian government has essentially decided that the cost of letting people leave the tax system is too high these days. So they are making it virtually impossible to leave. But you still have options if you act now. The current rules still allow for legitimate tax residency changes. So you can still implement Australian tax residency exit strategies that are going to work in this year. So don't worry. Of course, be prepared and be quick. So the question is now, are you going to take action while you still can? Or are you going to wait until Australian tax trap next year in 2026 makes it possible, really? Look, I've seen what happens when people wait too long. I've had clients who, well, could have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars if you'd asked 6 months earlier. So please, you don't want to be that guy. Don't let it be you. These new rules aren't just about changing definitions, they are about changing your future. And if you value your financial freedom and want to keep your options open, you need to act now because the clock is literally ticking. The Australian government has given you until July 2026 to implement your exit strategy under the current rules. And after that, the new rules will make it almost impossible to leave. So if you're ready to explore your options for leaving Australia for UAE tax benefits, visit us at emifalls.com, click on the link here in the description for a free consultation, and we will analyze your specific situation and create a plan that works for your specific circumstances. See you in the next video.